Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to APUSH. Today we're going to discuss the aftermath of the election of 1844 and the ascent of James K. Polk. His annexation of Texas is, of course, going to lead to the thing that we've been talking about for the last couple of days, the inevitable war with Mexico. And so this is going to be a necessarily brief overview of the Mexican-American War, the forces unleashed by it, and to the aftermath and result of the conflict. So let's dive in. Here are our basic objectives for today, and let's pick it up from there and move forward. So, the annexation of Texas is of course, going to create a conflict called the Mexican-American War. Texas, as we talked about, was theoretically independent, depending on who you asked. They had the signature of the former Mexican president Santa Anna on the treaty that said Texas was independent, but the current government of Mexico, who had overthrown Santa Anna's government, did not recognize that treaty. And so the Constitution, or the state of Texas's independence, is in some dispute. When Polk was elected, or after the election, the Tyler administration immediately was able to move forward with plans for annexation because, of course, one of Polk's campaign promises was aggressive westward expansion and the annexation of Texas. And, of course, also, 54-40-year fight, which, as we talked about last time, he immediately went back on and did not follow through on war with England, mostly because he wanted to prosecute the war with Mexico. So the annexation of Texas is going to lead to immediate rise in tensions between the new government in Mexico City and the United States. We were able to, we did send some negotiators down after the disastrous Peacemaker incident in order to try to negotiate the border, debts owed by the Mexican government to U.S. citizens, and we offered to purchase California and New Mexico. But the new government was unwilling to deal with us, mostly because they felt insulted by the attempt to buy half their territory, and they were pretty upset about the annexation of Texas. So this is more or less going to necessitate an armed conflict. But the way that conflict started is somewhat problematic because, of course, Mexico, as we talked about before, has been relatively unstable. And this era in Mexican history is going to lead to a return of our good friend, the caudillo par excellence, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Santa Anna is going to come back to power partially with the help of the United States. There was a secret deal between the United States and Santa Anna that if we got him back into Mexico, he would help facilitate the peaceful transition of power from Texas, or from annexing Texas into the United States. But as soon as Santa Anna got to Mexico, he betrayed the United States and used our attempt to annex Texas as a way to get back into power in Mexico, famously saying, if the U.S. helps the rebels, I will march my army to Washington and place upon its capital the Mexican flag. And so, vowing to fight the Americans, Santa Anna becomes president of Mexico again in the aftermath of the annexation of Texas, and he's going to rule throughout the period of the Mexican-American War. So it turns out you can't trust Santa Anna, which we probably should have known, but considering there was going to be war with Mexico anyway, what did we really have to lose? It was a reasonable gamble, I think. We're going to send, so in order to, obviously the United States, because we are the city upon the hill, does not fight aggressive wars. And so we're going to need some sort of casus belli in order to declare war on Mexico. We can't just declare war on Mexico saying that we want to take half their territory. That doesn't work that way. And so we're going to send, once we annex Texas, an army under the command of a guy named Zachary Taylor down to go and protect our new interests in Mexico. In Texas. There's some question as to whether or not we were actually trying to defend Texas versus to what extent we were trying to provoke the Mexicans into war, because immediately what happened is Taylor started sending forces down into the disputed territory between what Texas actually controlled and what they claimed in order to try and provoke the Mexicans into a fight. There is some question as to whether or not our troops actually crossed the Rio Grande into Mexican territory. But regardless, Mexican troops fired on U.S. troops. There was a short skirmish, and this provided President Polk with his casus belli to declare war. Quote, let's see. The pretext that Texas, a nation as independent as herself, thought proper to unite with its destinies with our own, she is affected to believe that we have severed her rightful territory and in official proclamations and manifestos have repeatedly threatened to make war on us for the purpose of reconquering Texas. In the meantime, we have tried every effort at reconciliation, which, yeah. Quote, After reintegrated menaces, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and has shed American blood on American soil, which, again, depends on your interpretation of what American soil is, but maybe. So, with these aggressive confrontations in hand, Polk is able to get a war message through Congress, and Congress is going to declare war. This is not a universally supported war. The Whig Party in general opposes war with Mexico, and most famously, Abraham Lincoln laid out all of these reasons why we shouldn't have war with Mexico. So take a moment to read this. Afterwards, Lincoln is going to be criticized for this, especially for the demand that we figure that Polk reveal the, quote, spot where American blood was shed on American soil. But this is Abraham Lincoln, one of his first major forays into politics as a rep from Illinois. And so we'll briefly mention this here. And Ulysses Grant was a young soldier in the Mexican-American War, and in his later recountings, he argued that Zachary Taylor was sent there to provoke a war. So we've got some sources arguing that we provoked this war with Mexico, even though Polk felt like he had solid justification for fighting. And this is going to lead to a massive controversy amongst transcendentalists, most famously Henry David Thoreau, so you should definitely pause and read Civil Disobedience, who eventually is going to be thrown in jail for refusing to pay his taxes because of opposition to the Mexican-American War. So, pause. So those are all the various perspectives here. You've got Southerners and advocates of Manifest Destiny pushing for war, Whigs and transcendentalists opposing war, but doesn't really matter. We've got war. So, on the early days of the fighting, it's going to take us some significant time to mobilize. Mexico already has a large standing army, and of course, as you know from previous discussions in this class, the United States does not have a large standing army, so we're going to have to train and recruit most of our army. We're also going to send John C. Fremont, Colonel John C. Fremont, out west to stage a rebellion in California. They're going to then overthrow the Mexican government and declare themselves the Independent Republic of California. With, look, one neat star there. Ooh, and a bear on their flag. They were known as the Bear Flag Republic, for what I hope are obvious reasons. So now we've got a potential claim to California as well, just in case we have an opportunity to totally annex it after the war. The early phases of the war is mostly going to consist of Zachary Taylor moving down and trying to march across northern Mexico, clashing repeatedly with the Mexican army. Most of these battles are problematic because our army is not super well trained, although we are much better supplied than the Mexican army. The Mexican army at this point is still using mostly military surplus from the Napoleonic Wars, whereas we are using much more accurate rifles that have been developed much later. And the United States is going to be much better supplied than the Mexican forces. The Mexican government has always struggled to finance a lot of their endeavors. And so although their army looks relatively large on paper, it's mostly ill-paid and ill-treated conscripts who don't really have much desire to fight and die for Mexico, whereas the American army is going to be much more motivated. Even so, the Mexicans are going to make a relatively fierce fight of it, and it's going to be a pretty brutal slog marching down across northern Mexico. Here's Ulysses Grant describing why Mexico was unable to fight effectively. So take it in, read it, we'll keep moving. And as Zachary Taylor is marching down from Texas, we're going to send a second army under the command of Winfield Scott to take the all-important Mexican fort of Veracruz and then push into Mexico City. The Battle of Veracruz is another amphibious assault. It's, again, relatively bloody, but a successful battle, and we are able to take the port. There's some question as to whether or not the Polk administration sent Winfield Scott down because he was worried about Zachary Taylor leveraging his success in the Mexican-American War to become a popular war hero and maybe president of the United States. But both Taylor and Winfield Scott are going to be presidential candidates from here on out. So in the end, maybe he's trying to blunt the popularity between these two guys so we don't have a single Andrew Jackson of the Mexican-American War. I don't know. Either way, the whole thing is relatively effective. Once we take Veracruz, here Ulysses Grant again, he's our main source on the Mexican-American War. Let's take a moment and read this. And then we'll keep moving on. The Battle of Cerro Gordo is the main battle where we defeated the Mexican army and then were able to take Mexico City. The Mexican army we defeated at Cerro Gordo was led by Santa Anna, and his forces were routed so completely that he actually left behind his artificial leg, which was captured by the U.S. forces, and we're currently holding in a museum in Indiana somewhere. So if you ever traveling across Indiana and want to see Santa Anna's wooden leg, you can go visit it and say hi. With the defeat of the Mexican army, we're then able to take over the Mexican government. It takes about 2 years for us to reestablish, or 1.5 years, for the Mexicans to reestablish enough of a government to sign the peace treaty. But of course, this peace treaty is going to be spectacularly punitive because Mexico is now essentially at our mercy. We've taken their most important port, we've staged rebellions in all their northern territories, and we are now occupying their capital. So the terms of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo are going to be spectacularly favorable to the United States. There is also going to be a movement in some segments of American population to annex all of Mexico and potentially even go and overthrow maybe the governments of the Southern Triangle of Nicaragua and Honduras. But all of this is stymied by an unsurprising source. Here's John C. Calhoun arguing why we shouldn't invade and take over all of Mexico, and it's pretty straightforward. From his opinion, there aren't enough white people there, and we don't want to integrate in a bunch of Native Americans and mixed-race people because then we have to govern them and maybe give them rights and such. So, yeah. John C. Calhoun, pretty universally awful, even when he's arguing for something probably positive, like not annexing all of Mexico. So what do we actually get from this? Well, we don't get Texas because, of course, we'd already annexed that, but we do get a significant portion of the western states. So we're going to take all of California and then to what is today Nevada and Utah, part of Colorado, part of New Mexico, and most of Arizona. We're later going to purchase the last piece, the Gadsden Purchase, from Mexico in about a decade after this in order to complete a railroad across the southern part of the United States. And so we end up paying significantly less than we had offered earlier in order to purchase, quote unquote, these territories from Mexico. But honestly, Mexico can't do anything about it because, again, we've defeated their army and have occupied their capital. So this is also going to lead to Zachary Taylor, despite Polk's best efforts, becoming a national figure. His nickname is Old Rough and Ready, and he's going to be a potential candidate for both the Democratic and the Whig parties because he is apolitical and had never voted in his life up to this point. And so both sides see him as a potential popular general common man figure to unite the newly enfranchised electorate. And so he's going to become an important political force moving forward. And of course, in the end, this is going to lead to significant opposition. Charles Sumner is going to pass a resolution that tries to ban slavery Charles Sumner is going to support a resolution that tries to ban slavery from all the territories gotten from Mexico. This quote-unquote Wilmot Proviso is, of course, never going to actually pass both houses of Congress because the Southerners have an even number of Senate seats. But it will create outrage and create controversy over whether or not slavery should be expanded into these territories. So keep in mind that all of this is going to be fought about as we move forward, and the Wilmot Proviso simply demonstrates the distance between Southerners, who had hoped to get a whole bunch of new territory to expand slavery, and Northerners, who are now advocating for the banning of slavery in said territories. So that's a significant distance between them, and that's going to be a huge problem for the Whig Party as they go forward, because the Whigs, always trying to be a national party, struggle to come up with an effective position on any of these issues about slavery. And so here's Wilmot putting a rock in the cart of the Whig Party as Henry Clay and Zachary Taylor pull the party in two different directions. So that's our lesson for today. Hopefully you can answer these questions in some detail. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll look at the aftermath of all of this as the United States tries to digest all of this new territory, and American society changes pretty drastically from the growth of new technology, new inventions, and the strength of the reform movements coming out of the Second Great Awakening. So, thank you for listening.